All right. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming out here on a Saturday evening. My name is Bruce Patton. I'm the curator here at Savoy. Was anybody here this afternoon to get to see the GSRA cars? All right, well, welcome back. So thanks for coming back. It was great. We had, I think it was a little over 100 cars out here by the pavilion. So it was a good time. I think everybody had a good time, hopefully. They were probably pretty tired. I'm sure you're pretty tired from this long day driving. But we've got a great program with Bob Varsha here. I'd like to go over a couple things before we get into the program. Hopefully you had a chance to go out and look at the current exhibits that we have out there. Get a look at the fabulous fiberglass because it is leaving this weekend, and we have small block muscle coming in next week. So make sure if you wanted to see the fabulous fiberglass, make sure you get to see those. Also, what I'd like to let you guys know is coming quickly right behind the small block muscle is it's a doozy. So we actually have 10 to 11 Duesenbergs coming in here. So please, that starts at the beginning of August. I think it's August 5th. So make sure you come and see those. Anybody here last night for Corvette Summer? All right, so got people here from that. So hopefully you enjoyed that. The next movie you'll see coming up is The Blues Brothers. So that'll be a fun movie. So make sure you see that, and you can see Mad Max is coming up too. So that'll probably be another big hit. So I'd like to thank Styles Auto Care. Again, we appreciate their support for doing these Tireside chats. And so I'd like to thank them. Now, before I bring out Bob, does anybody know Tom Chenal? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. I'm surprised if everybody didn't raise their hand, but I'm going to bring out Tom. Tom's our director of development, so if you didn't raise your hand, he will find you later. So, and Tom's going to help us moderate the program, and I'll let Tom go ahead and introduce Bob. Thank you.
Oh, Bruce, thank you for that introduction. And you can tell this is always a really good sign when you start with water because of the conversations that's already taking place from that standpoint and what we get to expect and anticipate this evening. Obviously you're not here tonight to see me because let's be honest. Like I think Bruce said a little bit earlier, I don't even think it was even mentioned in any of the publicity that I was moderating tonight. So you are really in for a treat. I'm honored and excited to introduce our guest tonight, Bob Varsha. I mean, you can see his bio behind us. I could sit here and read it word for word for you, but I'm not going to do that because the way we're going to have our conversation tonight is going to kind of fall in line with what his bio is. I mean, it's kind of a timeline of his career and everything he's done and put into it. And so that's what we're going to talk about. So you are welcome to read through some of the highlights of what he has done in his career that's led him to this opportunity. But we are really honored and excited to welcome Bob Varsha to Savoy for tonight's Tireside Chat program.
Buddy, good to be with you.
Well, it is an honor, and I will say this. This is one of those things that came about very naturally, and I say this is a testament to you as well. We were introduced by a friend of the museum. Harry Cricks was kind enough. He called me up one day, and he was like, "I got an idea for this program for you." He goes, "You know Bob Varsha?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, I know of him. Like, I don't know him." He's like, "Well, I'd love to introduce you. I think you'd make a great program." And I'm like, "Hey, would love to do that because I've followed him for years in the world of motorsports and broadcasting and having a little bit of broadcast experience myself. And so it's one of those things like I would love that opportunity." And he's like, "Well, he's in Atlanta. I would love to introduce you." Bob Varsha lives in Atlanta? Like, what? Like, yeah. How long have you lived in Atlanta?
52 years.
Yeah. How many? Who else knew he lived in Atlanta? Right? Like, okay. Well, okay, great. But no. So let's kind of start with the timeline here. Okay. So your originally personal life. I mean, from New York, and
Right.
And, we titled this program tonight, Off to the Races. And that was a little bit in honor of what got you involved in sports altogether, as you were a runner.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I ran in high school and had a reasonable amount of success, and then got welcomed to Dartmouth College, where I ran cross country and track for 4 years.
Ivy League, D1, I mean, you were a collegiate athlete.
I did okay. Yes, I was definitely a collegiate athlete. I thought you were going to say collegiate champion, but there wasn't a whole lot of that. But I made all Ivy a couple of times. Don't Google that. And like most college athletes, unless you're football, basketball, or baseball, I thought, well, okay, that was fun. That part of my life is over because I got to go off to law school now and be a real grown-up. So I looked at various parts of the country to go to school, and came down to Vanderbilt in Nashville and Emory University in Atlanta. And an old lawyer friend of mine gave me some great advice, which was, wherever you choose, make sure that's the place you want to live after law school, because that way all your classmates will be the prosecutors and the cops and the other lawyers and the judges and everything else. Oh. And so those relationships are important. I thought, okay, that's cool. So I went to Atlanta, and lo and behold, I fell in with a bunch of ex-collegiate athletes, and the running scene was just rising all around the country, but particularly in Atlanta, where they had an organization called the Atlanta Track Club.
I think we've heard of that around here.
Right?
Yeah.
Very loosely organized association, originally track coaches who were just trying to organize some volunteers so they could get help at their various meets. But running, as I say, exploded, and I got better and better as I matured as a runner. Wound up going to the Olympic trials for the 76 games in Montreal, where I finished 6th, which technically makes you an alternate, which literally means nothing. You just stay in shape in case we need you. But anyway, along the way, I kind of got involved with the leadership of the track club, and eventually they hired me as their first paid executive director. Bought an office, hired secretaries, and tried to run the thing as a business. And the primary product, if you will, was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution Peachtree Road Race. 4th of July, just finished it with 50,000 runners. Back when I organized it for several years, it was about 12,000. And I'm a guy who ran the race in 1974 with about 1,000 people, and I thought, oh no, I'm not doing that again. That's way too many people out there. So I worked on the administrative side. Rotated out of that job because by then I graduated from law school and I was working for a firm downtown. But I still got the occasional call to come in and help out with the race, which I was happy to do. And one of those calls was from the local CBS affiliate who wanted to put it on local TV, the race. And did that in my window pane plaid 3-piece suit with hair down to my shoulders and a really bad mustache.
Google that one.
Now,
you see somebody else.
Actually, let me know if you do Google it, because I've been promised a copy of that broadcast for a long time. I've never received it. But anyway, one thing led to another, and a year or two later, somebody called me from Turner Broadcasting and said, this is really cool. We watched that TV broadcast, and we want to put it on our cable networks across the country and around the world. So will you do the same job for us? I said, sure, fine. So off we went, did the job, shook hands afterwards, walked away. And about 6 weeks later, I got a call from Turner asking me if I wanted to audition for a job doing news and sports for TBS. And I said, well, sure, I can do that, which is kind of the theme through my whole career is, how would you like, I can do that. Have you ever heard of, I can do that.
That's how this happened.
That's how this happened, right, absolutely. Harry Crick said, how'd you like to? I said, I can do that. The whole theme of my career has been right place, right time. I've been extremely lucky. With a little bit of talent maybe and a whole big chunk of good luck, I've had great situations. So I went to work for Turner doing news watches, they were called. every commercial break in the late night movies, this is like between midnight and 2:30 in the morning, they would do a news watch, which was like 3 quick headlines of something happening around the world, torn from the wire services. 3 of those, and then a promotional gizmo. That led to working for CNN Radio, and CNN2 which it was called, and then it became CNN Headline, and then Headline News, and now HLN. And I also spent time in the CNN sports department with guys like Dan Patrick, who went on to fame with ESPN, Keith Olbermann, who went on to ESPN and became a political junkie, and God knows where he is right now. Maybe a real junkie. And a bunch of wonderful people, and learning all the way. I looked out the window one day, and there was a construction trailer out on the parking lot. And I asked what that was, and I was told this was a company called World Sports Enterprises, just formed, and they had an idea for a show that they were going to produce for TBS called Motor Week Illustrated. Anybody remember Motor Week Illustrated? Yeah. The fastest half hour in television. And what they would do, it was founded by Ken Squire, the Hall of Fame NASCAR announcer, and Fred Reinstein. Thank you. It just went right out of my head. And Fred was an industry veteran. He had covered the Kennedy assassination. His cameras were in the basement of the Dallas jail when they walked Lee Harvey Oswald out the door and into history. Vietnam, the space program, you name it, Fred had covered it as a producer. Neither gentleman are with us anymore, sadly, but they were both great mentors of mine. And the way they would do the show is they would shoot basically the beginning and the end of the show. They call that a donut. In the middle, they would leave a space for an update because they were shooting on Wednesday, and a lot happens between then and when the show would air on Saturday. So they needed somebody to go in the studio, stand in front of the camera, say what had happened, races, qualifying, crashes, whatever was going on. And I won that job over a guy named Brad Nessler, who went on to become a big star at CBS and what have you. That's sort of part of my career as well. I worked with all these people who went on to become big stars. So I started working with World Sports, and then I got fired at CNN, which is a whole nother story. I worked for a great guy who could take you out to lunch, fire you, and make you feel like $1 million. And that was what we had. So I went to World Sports and I said, hey, is there a job here? And they said, yeah, what do you know about motorsports? And nothing, except what I learned doing the donut hole on your show. And they put me to work doing what we called video news releases. This was new for the sport at the time. I would go to the track with a cameraman, get a line feed, as we call it, the actual broadcast feed that went out, shoot some of my own stuff, including interviews and cutaway shots and that sort of thing, write a script, voice that script onto a videotape, cover it with pictures of the race, what happened, who won, let's hear from him, and then take that tape and rush off to the nearest satellite uplink and put it up on the satellite for any sports department around the country that wanted that news or wanted that material in their show, but could not afford to send somebody to the actual race. So I did those for a couple of years, which was a wonderful learning experience. I was covering the IMSA, what was then known as the Camel GT series, which was a spectacular era in sports car racing. And I got to know so many great athletes and their stories. I mean, car owners like Bruce Levin and Jim Busby and Al Holbert, and great international drivers who showed up on the scene like Jochen Maas and Bob Wallach and Hans Stuck. And of course the great domestic American drivers like Scott Pruitt and Jack Baldwin. Met all of these guys. Everybody was perfectly willing. Everybody wanted to be on television, so they were happy to give me their stories and tell me what I was screwing up. I actually did some shows with Bob Aiken, who raced the Coca-Cola Porsche 962s for a while before he sadly died in a crash up Road Atlanta. Bob taught me all kinds of interesting things, like no, you don't want to shift in the turn. You don't? Okay, I'll go with that. This kind of thing, from the sublime to the ridiculous. And while I was doing the IMSA races, I got to know folks from another young upstart company called ESPN, which back then was brand new, 2 or 3 years old, I guess. And they said, hey, would you like to host our broadcasts?
Yeah, I can do that.
I could do that.
Yeah.
So next thing I knew, I was flying around with ESPN, covering IMSA and the Camel GT Series. A great time. Again, learned a lot. And while I was there doing motorsports, I heard from some of their producers who would say, well, I've got this gymnastics tournament coming up, and no one among the Sports Center announcers wants to do it. How'd you like to do that? I can do that. And that led to, as you can see on this, well, you can't see it because it went away. This wonderful resume that I wrote that led to figure skating, swimming, all sorts of Olympic sports, gymnastics. I did basketball, boxing, and all of these things outside of that realm. And it was basically just getting my hand in the air. Will you do this? Yeah, I can do that. And then I'd go to the internet and study like crazy. And
so let's talk about that just for a minute.
Okay.
So, you came for law school to Atlanta, then you had the opportunity. Yep, I can do that. No, I don't know a lot about it. I'm going to learn. Mm-hmm. And you can imagine, okay, so broadcasting is one of these things where you don't just get up and talk. I mean, it is one of those things where you are literally providing the expertise, the audio for people to visualize or hear, whether it be radio, if you're on TV. And so you have to know what you're talking about.
To a certain degree.
Okay. You start running through the sports that you have broadcast. And let's not talk motorsports yet. I mean, let's talk the figure skating, the skiing, the gymnastics, the Tour de France.
Yep.
Track and field, now that's one, I mean, you ran.
That was my baby.
So that was your baby. Yeah. That one came natural, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about some of those things that you were thrown into. Of course, you volunteered in a sense, or, hey, I can do that. Like, let's talk about some of the sports that led you into gaining the experience of just broadcasting.
Well, I should probably say that I stopped practicing law somewhere early in this process. And afterwards, people would forever ask me, do you feel like you wasted your time going to law school for 3 years when you only practiced law for 4 or 5? And I said, actually, no, not at all. Because in law school, you learn how to look at a situation, a certain set of facts from different perspectives. You learn how to research an issue or an event. Your vocabulary absolutely expands. And advocacy, in my view, being a lawyer, speaking on behalf of a client, is storytelling. And that's what you do in broadcasting. You're a storyteller. And that was probably the most fun, because sports is full of so many great stories, not just motorsports, every sport. Backstage, we were talking about figure skating and the differences, the crazy people you meet up with. Some of you probably know all about this, but take, for example, the pair skaters. Pair skaters usually involves a big guy and a small woman. That's because their routines have to include the man lifting up the woman and spinning around and what have you. Dance pairs are different because they could be the same height because you never lift. You have to stay in contact with each other for most of the skating. See, this is the kind of stuff you learn. And you can kind of throw her a little way, but you've got to get back to her, and off you go. So I learned that most of these big guys that were partnering the women in pair skating were ex-hockey players, which I thought was a pretty cool thing. Big, strong guys, they can skate, they have since they were kids, and they could party. So that was one of the sports in which you learn stuff that you can talk about and stuff that you can't, including several of America's darlings, female figure skaters who were really hard partiers. But it was great to meet all these people and hear their stories.
Out of all these, I don't want to call them random, but these sports that you did, outside of the motorsports side, was there one that you just thoroughly enjoyed the most? And was there one that you just really didn't enjoy at all? I mean,
Well, I think, the one that I enjoyed the most is, at least in part, because I only did it once. That was the 2001 Tour de France, the big cycling classic over in France. It was such a wonderful time. My wife Karen is here. She can testify. We drove all around France in a July summer, stopping in little towns and big cities along the way and spending 4 or 5 hours a day watching these incredible athletes. Of course, that all kind of went down the drain when we found out the most incredible athlete was the guy who won, Lance Armstrong, who subsequently admitted that he was cheating the whole time. So that was not very cool. But it's such a beautiful sport, the way the peloton changes form as they go either on wide streets or tiny mountain trails. And there's a certain etiquette in the peloton. One guy is the padrone of the peloton. He decides when this Frenchman can break away from the group and go out front because we're going to go through his home village and he wants to be shown leading as he goes through. So we'll let him do that as long as he promises to come back and rejoin the peloton. I learned that you don't jump the peloton at the feeding areas where the riders all get a bag and they eat and they do all that kind of stuff. Nor do you jump a guy when he is having a comfort break, which is when you just kind of ride over the side of the road and pull up your shorts and do your business and then get back on it. I also learned that you don't take advantage of a crash. Now, that year, 2001, Lance's big rival was Jan Ullrich, a German, who was very good, very much Lance's equal up to a point. But they were on a particular stage where Ullrich overshot his turn, crashed down the hillside. And I was thinking, go, Lance, go. Here's your opportunity. You can jump and you can open a big gap over him. And I was working with two long-time cycling announcers, Phil Leggett and Paul Sherwin. And when I said that to them during commercial break, they looked at me like I had 3 heads. You don't take off when your opponent has crashed. You wait till he gets up and rejoins, if he can, and off you go again. So all this kind of stuff. Railroad crossing, half the field gets stopped. Everybody stops on the other side. Train goes through, up go the boards, and everybody takes off again. This kind of stuff was just manna from heaven for me, learning about this sort of thing. And the same was true in my racing coverage. Now, I went with ESPN covering every kind of racing that there is until I basically got fired from ESPN.
Another story for another day, right?
Right, yeah. Well, I was just humming away. I did 200 individual shows one year. And a year or two after that, this person came to me and said, I just don't think we're going to have anything for you next year, Bob. And I thought, that's weird. Let's go talk to your producers and see if they feel that way. But anyway, you can find him. I'll give you a hint. He's in one of the books written about ESPN and some of the guys that came under criminal indictment while they were there. He's one of them. Sexual harassment. So, I had to leave. And once again, I went looking for a job. And I'm jumping ahead of the story here, but Formula One got me into a company called Speed Vision. Let's back up to ESPN. I was doing sports cars. We'd done Le Mans, including the year when we discovered that French television doesn't cover the race for 24 hours, which we had promised our viewers we were going to show them. They all go have their wine and go to bed and get up the next day and catch the sunrise. So we had to jury rig a green screen like the weatherman uses on your local station. And I sat there, another guy and I changed positions for about 9 hours with nothing behind us but a black screen and headlights going by and a pit reporter who tried to fill in with stories. That was one long night. But anyway, I was used to doing races like that, and I got a call from a guy named Terry Lingner, who was their motorsports coordinating producer at ESPN, and he said, "How'd you like to do a Formula One race?" This was in 1987. And I said,
Sure, I can do that.
there you go.
Yeah.
I can do a race with 250 drivers in it. I can handle 26 guys for an hour and a half. So off I went to the Austrian Grand Prix at Spielberg. This was the Österreich Ring, the big, old, nasty circuit that's now known as Red Bull Ring and has been sort of chopped off. But that's okay. My predecessor in the job had been Sir Jackie Stewart, who wasn't a sir then. He was just a 3-time world champion.
Just.
And he had been doing all his work for ABC, and this is when ABC and ESPN kind of got together, and ABC let ESPN do some stuff, but kept the good stuff for themselves. And Jackie just did not want to go to Austria to do this race. So I went. One of the first things I found out is that Vienna is not spelled Vienna on the road maps in Austria. It's Wien, W-I-E-N. And it only took me about 70 miles out of my way before I figured that out. But anyway, so we got to the race working with Chris Economaki, many of you sure remembers, and John Besignano, who was my pit guy for many years after. And so I was all set to do this quick race and then get back to my, beer and my lederhosen and all that kind of stuff. And they sent the field on its way. Zoom, over the hill, crash, big crash, red flag, bring them all back. Nobody hurt, fortunately. Not every team had a backup car, so we had a couple of cars fewer when we lined them all up about an hour and a half later and sent them all off on their way again. Over the hill, crash. Big steaming pile, bring them all back. So another red flag. Next thing you know, it's like 4 hours before we've seen one complete green flag lap of the racetrack. But we got the thing in. My producer had to use his personal American Express card to guarantee the satellite time to get the show back to the United States, because everything had to be live in Formula One. And basically, the rest of the world rode our feed, which means they had to find something else to do when we were in commercial break, but tough. So that's how I got into Formula One. So that was on my resume when I got fired at ESPN. And I found out that the rights were going to a company called Speed Vision Outdoor Life. And I asked them if they had a job. And they said, absolutely. And so I continued with Formula One with them. Back to your point. That's not what I meant to be talking about. Tour de France was one of my favorite events in a non-motorsports vein. My least favorite would be figure skating. You just get tired of being in the arena and
Counting how many axles and spins.
Right, exactly, and hoping that your color commentator. And I had some wonderful ones, including Olympic champions like Christy Yamaguchi, and I just never quite, got simpatico with figure skating, I have to say. I met Nancy Kerrigan once when she was in the midst of a tirade about how much she hated her husband, who was also her manager, and was forcing her to do all these post-Olympic shows. You see them all the time. You tell you, Parade of the Olympic Champions. So that would probably be my least favorite thing to do. But if I had to do something, that would be it.
So and you've done baseball and you've done other sports, is there a sport that you haven't done that you would like to do one day, or that you might not get the chance, but it's one you wish you would have had the opportunity to do?
Yeah, golf. I would like to do golf because it's a very slow-moving game, so it's very conversational, and you don't have to have the slightest idea what you're talking about. I guarantee you ask Tiger Woods or any of the pros, what about these announcers? And they're going to say, oh, those guys, they don't know squat. But But yeah, I always thought, and it's, it happens in a nice place. I don't play the game. I stopped a long time ago, for the sake of my sanity. But yeah, that would be fun to try, or to do an actual Olympic Games. It said Olympics on my bio there behind me, but actually I've done Olympic trials for several Olympiads, including archery, equestrian, shooting. God, what else do we have? Better that than now when they put me on something like breakdancing or curling.
Yeah,
That would be a big one. One time at ESPN, we did a thing called Race Day America. Jack Arute, longtime pit reporter, was in a studio in Bristol, and we had people all around the country doing various races that would appear on ESPN. And I got to do a very special race weekend. I got to do the demolition derby and rollover contest on Long Island, where I grew up, at Riverhead Raceway. A rollover contest, if you don't know, is where you have an old junked up rice burner, some small car, and you drive around and you go right at a ramp, like the old thrill shows, where you would just put one set of wheels up. But unlike the thrill shows where they go drive around and keep the car balanced on two wheels, the idea here was to launch off that ramp and see who could roll the car over the most times. That was pretty exciting. The guy who won got out, and I hate to be stereotypical of people, but this guy was a classic Long Island greaser that I grew up with. Got out of the car, had this old, God knows how old, crash helmet that wouldn't have done him any good at all in a crash. Black singlet T-shirt, wife beaters we used to call them. He gets out of this car in his sneakers, and they give him a trophy, and our cameraman approaches him, and he bursts into tears, saying, "This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me in my life." And I thought, yeah, buddy. So then they clean all that away, and we do a figure eight contest. And you know what that is? It's an actual figure eight on the track, which means that the track crosses itself at one point. So this is a great game of skill. You have to be able to rock it around, and cover the most laps you can in a given amount of time, and not meet in the middle, which inevitably they do and did. And it doesn't really give you a story that goes anywhere, because either you have practically no cars left at the end of the day, or you've got one guy who actually did a great job avoiding calamity. We also did what was called an enduro. This is a really short track, about a third of a mile, I guess, and they put cars 3 deep, again, old junkers, all the way around the track, so it looked like the Long Island Expressway, just bumper to bumper cars. And then at the green flag, they would all start moving. And eventually they're bumping into each other and banging, hitting the walls and spinning out and all that sort of thing. And eventually one car survives and is declared the winner. And to this day, I have no idea how they decided that. But we got through it.
You really have done it all. I mean,
pretty much. Yeah. What was the question?
Well, I mean, that's where we were going, right? I mean, so okay, let's start talking about motorsports in a sense, because you've done all these other sports. We know some of that, and you're really getting into the motorsports. And it came down to when they asked if you wanted to do it, and you just said, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy? Were you a car guy beforehand? Like,
No.
did you? No.
No.
So this is something you learned as you did it.
Absolutely. I grew up in suburban Long Island. Never went to a race. The closest thing to a race car in my neighborhood was a Plymouth with a Hemi engine running in the, in basically a pro stock car, sponsored by one of my buddy's dad, who was a car dealer. And so, okay, he's my favorite driver. I never saw him race, but
he was in your neighborhood.
That's right. And my buddy was so proud that this guy raced with his father's colors on the door. But no, I didn't go to a race until I was paid to, I think.
Wow.
And I've tried to stick to that. No, I have gotten off that wagon a couple of times, but never bought a ticket. I'll say that.
So let's talk a little bit about motorsports. You touched on it to begin with of how you got into Formula One, but you've done a lot of it. I mean, you talked about Indy and you talk about karting and a lot of that. Obviously, you really got into Formula One. I mean, that became your niche. That became your expertise. Let's start there. I mean, that's the one you've had the most experience with. I mean, you could literally hang your hat on that career alone, outside of everything else that you've done in that sense. Let's talk about Formula One, because you were calling Formula One races when Formula One wasn't popular in the States.
In the States, yeah, I think
mean,
that's fair to say.
Let's look at that.
I did that first race in 1987. In 88, they decided wanted more of a blue ribbon name, so they paired Chris Economaki with David Hobbs. David had been working for CBS, and there's a whole long story there. But people knew David, and he worked with Chris Economaki, who my buddy Dave Despain's wife calls cockamamie. But Chris deserves all the credit in the world. He basically single-handedly invented the role of the pit reporter. And he had very strict ideas about how you should do the job. You don't get it. He used to rant and rant about how modern pit reporters get out there and try to tell you everything they know before they finally ask a question. And he said, "Don't do that." Everybody's got a Chris Economaki impersonation. Don't do that. You get out there and ask the question. So, if you had Mario Andretti there, he'd say, "What's it like out there, Mario?" Or, "How's it handling, AJ?" or whatever. Any question with more than 8 words was too much. But he was a heck of a guy. He did not want to drive with Chris Economaki because he considered the shoulder of the highway to be part of the highway. And he was always in a hurry. But he had an extraordinary ability to recall every restaurant he ever went to and what he ate. Because in 1989, Chris was done. I think he just wanted one more grand tour. Then he pulled out because he was deaf as a stone. And they paired me with David Hobbs. And that was the beginning of a 25-year relationship. Brothers, as David always used to say. And never a crossword between us in all the years we traveled to all these crazy places together. Because back in the day, ESPN went to every single Formula One race, and no other broadcaster in the world did that. Not the British, not the Germans, not the Japanese, but ESPN was there. And then gradually we started pulling back and doing the races from a studio, sound booth really, in Bristol, Connecticut, where ESPN is located, which is a much cheaper way to do the race from a financial perspective, but it's not a very happy way to do a race from a technical storytelling perspective. I'm not crazy about it to this day, but they do it all the time. In fact, most sports below the pro level are done from looking at a monitor. You can always tell. Like if they're doing college basketball, they'll say, "Okay, Temple brings the ball down the court," and they'll be looking for their number one scorer, Jones, because they don't use anybody's name until they have time to figure out who everybody is. And so it's Temple bringing the ball down the court, not their star guard, Jones, bringing the ball down the court. That means they're not at the game.
So let's think about that for a second. A little broadcast insight to you. I mean, you're probably thinking back of races you've listened to, you've watched, and you're there. They're there in your mind listening to the story and the broadcast, yet you're in a studio in Bristol, Connecticut, inside the studios at ESPN doing this. Now, the difference is, like you said, you started off going to all the races.
Right.
So you went to these tracks that you are now broadcasting at from a studio stateside, but you had the recollection, you had the experience of being there previously to be able to talk about that. The tracks you went to, I mean, let's talk about the life of a weekend at the track. again, this is not just getting on there and talking about what you see or what you're trying to watch. The research, the studying, the insight, the interviews, I mean, it is more than a full-time job to prepare for each individual race.
Yeah, and that leads to a problem, which is over-preparation. There's so much you want to talk about, and it can be dangerous to try to get it all in. Either you talk too fast, or you lose your train of thought, or you ignore what's actually happening now on the TV screen, which is what people are tuned in for in the first place. And that's one of the challenges of broadcasting. As you say, I went to virtual all the tracks that were active in 1988, 89 onward, until we started pulling away. And then tracks started changing. Big new speedways were built. My Australian Grand Prix was in lovely town, the city of churches, Adelaide. I never went to a Formula One race in Melbourne, never went to Singapore, never went to Malaysia, never went to any of these Herman Tilke designed tracks that all joined in later years. That made the job a little bit tougher, since every racetrack in the world looks the same from curb to curb. You want to be able to talk about the area and the history and the food and the what have you. And that becomes hard when you haven't actually gone there.
So with Formula One, and we'll go back to the aspect of you have seen its evolution of, and just from an international sport, but then thinking of it domestically and its growth and popularity and the things that take place here. I mean, what, in the past 10, 15, 20 years? I mean, what's been the aspect of it here that has just exploded to the popularity that it sees today?
Well, I always used to argue that Americans did have an interest in Formula One. I mean, maybe not as much as NASCAR or IndyCar or so on, but when Formula One first raced at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway in 2000 or 2001, there was over 125,000 people in that track.
Yep.
And Formula One people had never seen anything like that in the world. They would never expect to get 125,000 people at a track. And the numbers just went up from there. Drive to Survive certainly changed the path of Formula One here in the United States. Having an American entity owning Formula One has led to a lot of things that Formula One never used to do. Social media, all sorts of individual feeds like F1 TV Pro, which I highly recommend. So this helped grow the sport. That leads to a different problem as a broadcaster. Before I went to on my Monaco cruise, which maybe we'll tell you about in a minute if we have time, I accepted the invitation from a young engineer who had just become a fan, well, had been for 3 or 4 years, and wanted to talk Formula One with me. I said, okay, fine, I'll meet you. And I realized very quickly that anything that happened before 2018, go back to the beginning of COVID, anything that happened before that, he had no idea what I was talking about. You know, you talk about the great champions and the Schumachers and the Prosts and the Sennas and the Mansells and the Piquets and all these guys. It's like, I'll have to look that up. Okay, and that I'm not picking on the guy. He's in his mid-20s and he's learning his new sport, just like I had to learn it a long time before.
So you mentioned some of that, and because I mean it's crazy how fast we're moving here in time. You've seen a lot, good and bad. What are a couple of those stories that will just stick with you forever on both ends of that spectrum?
Well, I'm often asked what are my favorite and least favorite races, my best and worst moments on a Formula One track. I have 2 best moments, and one is not a Formula One, but a racing story. One is the 2008 Formula One season finale in Brazil, where Lewis Hamilton was fighting, my mind's killing me, Ferrari, Felipe Massa, who was born near the racetrack in Sao Paulo, and had to sweep the weekend, had to take pole, for which they granted a point back then, and had to win the race. Lewis simply had to finish sixth or better to claim the championship. Neither man had won the title before. So off they go. It's a wonderful wet, dry race. People changing tires, making 5 pit stops, really exciting stuff. And at the very last race, lap, Lewis is in 7th place, chasing one of the Toyotas who had stayed on rain tires as the track dried out. Everybody else, just about everybody else, had changed to slicks. Massa is up front, and he comes through, wins the race, and all of Brazil is ecstatic. We had wonderful pictures from the Ferrari garage as his father, Juan Antonio, is jumping around and hugging everybody, and it's all going great, but the lap isn't finished. And out there, Lewis passes. It was Timo Glock in the Toyota, and Lewis catches him with 2 corners to go and passes him for the 6th place he needed. And in the announce booth, David and Steve Matchett and I were all going crazy too, because just watching this extraordinary thing happen. So Lewis comes around and crosses the line, and we go back to the Ferrari garage, and Juan Antonio is still celebrating, and a Ferrari uniformed woman comes up to him and starts talking to him in his face. And the look on his face goes from ecstasy to agony in the space of 3 seconds. He's just, and boy, oh boy, that was tough to watch. I must say, Massa handled it all very graciously, and Lewis. But boy, oh, that was quite something. The other favorite race I'd always remember was '88 at Le Mans. For the previous few years, Jaguar, Tom Walkinshaw's mighty Jaguars, had been coming back and falling short. All right, we'd bring 4 cars, not enough. We'd bring 6 cars, not enough. And they would spray paint on the inside of the garage, "We shall return." Well, they did. And in '88, they were up against a 3 or 4 car armada of factory Porsches. And off we go. Race is shaping up to be another Porsche win. The Jags were running 2, 3, 4, I think, but it was a Porsche out front driven by Klaus Ludwig, who had won the race on several occasions, but somehow he mysteriously missed the pit signal. And this is Le Mans, 8 miles around. Gets a short distance around the lap, runs out of fuel. So he starts cranking the starter motor to get the car back around to the pits, which he was able to do, but not before they went a long way down in the top 10. It was, coming up to the end of the race. And so we had this amazing battle at the end as the Jaguar was being chased by the Porsche. And the Jag was Jan Lammers, who were the other 2 drivers? Andy Wallace and no, it wasn't Bob. It was Wallace, Lammers, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the 3rd driver offhand. But you should know that Le Mans is considered a British race on French soil. And the Brits, by and large, were kind of tired of all this. Okay, that Porsche's going to win again. What are we going to do? But when it became clear that Jaguar was competitive, suddenly the ferries across the channel were full of Brits who wanted to come to Le Mans, which you can do in a matter of hours. And the grandstands were packed as the laps ran down. Ludwig came up short. Jaguar won the race for the first time since 1955, that terrible year when 94 people were killed in a crash of a Mercedes. And as the Jaguars, 3 of them, crossed the finish line echelon style, the flags were waving and these people were bellowing, God save the Queen and everything. There was so much raw emotion that's as close as I've ever come to choking up on the air. It was just so inspiring. So those are my two favorite racing moments. My least favorite, not surprisingly, I'm sure, was May 1st of 1994, when Derek Daly and I, who was my partner at the time, were in the basement at Bristol, and the blackest weekend in Formula One history, as far as I'm concerned, unfolded. Rubens Barrichello crashed Eddie Jordan's car and almost died. That was on a Friday in practice. Yep. Saturday, Roland Ratzenberger and his British Formula 3 car is out here in the garage. I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag there.
It's been on display. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's right. It was here with the Indy cars, as I recall. So he was killed in a qualifying crash on Saturday. Yep. The great Ayrton Senna was mulling not running the race. Dr. Sid Watkins, the wonderful chief medical officer for Formula One, told him, don't do it. Let's go fishing. You don't want to do this. Senna said, no, I have to do it. So he started and took the lead over Michael Schumacher, driving a Benetton that everybody knew was a cheater car, was using banned traction control. Off they went, but not before. At the start line, there was a crash, and J.J. Leto's Benetton was hit up the back by Pedro Lamy in a Lotus, and a chunk of the left front wheel assembly went up into the grandstands and seriously injured some fans. Later in the race, Michele Alboreto overshot his pit and crashed into a bunch of pit crewmen and broke the legs of one of them. It was just one thing after another. And then, of course, Senna in that race hit the wall at the Tamburello corner and died. And I learned a long time ago in motorsports that you're working with a veteran racer, they know. They see the race totally differently than a fan, even an experienced fan like me. And Derek looked at that crash and said, it's not survivable. And of course it wasn't, and we lost Senna. But working out of ESPN turned out to be a good thing for us because we had their worldwide news gathering capacity right there in the building, even at 5 o'clock in the morning. So we learned, probably before anybody in the newsroom, the press room at the track, which was on lockdown, that Senna had been declared dead at the hospital in Bologna. Senna was an amazing guy. I interviewed him on several occasions, and I've kind of got a joke. Anybody want to hear my Senna joke?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not too soon. Senna, as we all know, was totally committed to his game. And he was also very strong in his faith. Carried a Bible, read it on airplanes to keep insurance salesmen from wanting to chat with him. In 1988, just before I went on Formula One full-time, Enzo Ferrari died 5 weeks before the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. At this point, McLaren, as a team, were dominating the season. Senna had won 6 races. Alain Prost, his teammate, had won 4. They raced at Spa-Francorchamps, which is probably my favorite track in the world, and Senna won that. So he's won 7 of 11 races to this point. Prost has 4. On to Monza we go. Still mourning Enzo Ferrari. Monza, of course, is the home of the Tifosi, the legendary, passionate Ferrari fans. Race begins. McLarens move into the lead, as they always did in that year. Senna draws away from the field, opens a huge lead, and he's coming around to pass a Williams, normally driven by Nigel Mansell. But Mansell came down with chickenpox that weekend. You can Google that, it's true. He was replaced by a sports car driver, Jean-Louis Schlesser. Senna tried to pass him. Schlesser made the wrong move. They collided, and both cars were out of the race. At this point, the Ferraris of Gerhard Berger and Michele Alboreto were running second and third, having gotten by Prost. I think he busted a valve or something. Ferrari won too, and the place goes bananas, as you can imagine. Tears everywhere, cheers, the crazy big Ferrari logo that the local Ferrari club drags out onto the front stretch for every podium ceremony. So Senna, who used to speak to God, Prost said that was the thing that made him so hard to beat because he figured he couldn't be killed, got down on his knees and said, "Almighty Father," God replied, "Yes, my son. You know I am your loyal acolyte and that I always do what you tell me and I try to live my life as you would have me do so." And God said, "Yes, my son, that is true. And I always come to you when I have a problem." And God saith, "Yes, you do. And you always help me through it. And now I'm the winningest driver in Formula One and a 3-time world champion. So today, I'm coming up on Schlesser in the Williams to pass him. I've got a massive lead. The 2 Ferraris are behind me, but way back. So I couldn't decide, should I try to pass him or should I try to just stay behind him and go on and try to win the race?" God says, "Yes, I remembered that." And Senna said, "Well, you told me to try to pass Schlesser." "Yes." "And we crashed." "You sure did," said God. And Senna said, "Well, God, I have only one question. Why did you tell me to try to pass Schlesser?" And God saith, "Really don't know. Enzo, why'd we tell him to try to pass Schlesser?" Anyway, that's my favorite original joke. What were we talking about?
Well, we're motorsports and we're winding down in that sense
Yeah.
because this hour has gone by extremely fast. So from that standpoint, so Bob Varsha today, I mean, we're talking still doing Formula One broadcasting on a weekly schedule. You talked a little bit about this cruise and this experience that I can hit on here in a little bit very quickly, but auctions, like there's a lot going on with you still to this day. I mean, give us a little bit about what Bob Varsha's doing these days.
Well, we'll start with my diagnosis of prostate cancer at the beginning of 2020. Every guy get checked. If you're over 50, get checked for prostate cancer because 1 in every 4 or 5 of us will develop it. So I was treated with chemo and radiation, and for a couple of years, basically, I was kind of off the stage, if you will. I wasn't working. So I found out then that all the people I'd been working with for all those years had very short attention span, and when I came back, it was sort of, well, some would just say, "I didn't know you were still alive." And others would say, "Where'd you go? What have you been doing?" So it was really hard to rebuild my career. It's been harder, and it's not done. It's harder than I ever thought it was. I don't have a regular race series that I cover other than our radio show on ESPN channel 81, ESPN Plus, 1 hour after qualifying, well, usually an hour, not always, 1 hour pre-show on race day and a post-race show after the race is over. Tune in or die. So I'm doing that. I've hooked up. I still occasionally do a Barrett-Jackson auction when they need an extra pair of hands. I've picked up a deal working with the GAA auctions, the Green Auto Auctions in Greensboro, North Carolina. Dean Green is a very well-known Ford dealer. He also has a boulevard full of other dealerships. Edsel Ford told me over dinner one night that he knew all about Dean Green, who was one of Ford's highest volume sellers. Dean has long done a dealer auction, which is one of those deals where 12 lanes of cars go through and they sell 100 cars every 30 seconds, and it's for dealers to help clear out their showroom or add new stock or whatever. So about 10 years ago, Dean opened a a collector car auction in his facility, which he built himself. 750 cars worth of climate-controlled space. So it can rain like hell or be cold outside or whatever, but inside it's nice and toasty, and he has all of these wonderful cars on display. Does 4 a year, and we do 3 of them for MAV TV, which is now Speed Sport 1 TV, which holds great promise of being the next version of Speed Vision, because 2 of the founders were 2 of the guys who originally founded Speed Vision. Roger Werner, who was the president of ESPN for a while, and Bob Scanlon, who was one of his executive producers. So hopefully that will mature into something really good. So I'm doing that. I do my Monaco cruise every year on the Windstar Cruise Line. We sail from Barcelona up the Côte d'Azur to Monaco, stop in Cannes, Cap d'Antibes, some cool place like that. Arrive in Monaco to catch qualifying on Saturday in seats that are arranged for us, and then the race on Sunday, and then we sail off to Portoferraro on the island of Elba or Portofino, and wind up in Rome at Civitavecchia, which is the Rome harbor. It's great, great fun. Unfortunately, you can't get a stateroom for next year. They're all sold out already. I give little lectures along the way about what Formula One is, how the season has gone to date, what the history of Monaco is, and so on. And we have a great time.
What a fabulous idea and experience to do in order to experience Monaco in that sense, from that standpoint. So,
I will say I'm a little afraid. I'm doing 2 events for no pay this year. We're saluting David Hobbs at a new concours at Lime Rock Park in Connecticut. That's at the end of July. And the following week, the 1st in September, we're honoring Brian Redmond at the in Corning, New York, at the International Motor Racing Research Center. Wonderful resource for racing scholars up at Watkins Glen. And I'll hook up with David Hobbs to do that. And the 2 things make me desperately afraid that I'm going to get invited to all these things that I don't get paid for anymore, but they really want me to be there. So.
And you said,
we'll
sure,
see.
I can do that.
That's right, I can do that. Sadly, that's exactly what I'll do. So, yeah.
Well, this has been, it's one of those things when you over-prepare, this has been not necessarily an over-preparing, this is just natural conversation that takes place and really tells you that, Bob is a natural, and in that, we met and spent time once together. And in preparing for this, I told him, I was like, I feel like I know you. And I don't know if that just comes from listening to your broadcast over the years and being part of it, but very thankful and grateful to have you here in our region, part of our car culture, and to have you here at Savoy with us tonight. And we would love to take the opportunity to open it up for some questions. Bruce's microphone, we want to make sure we go around with that. We are recording, so we can, if you'll hold off for the microphone, we'll be able to get that recorded, and we'll take some Q&A real quick.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple questions. I'm curious what you think of the theory that Timo Glock let Hamilton pass him in Brazil. And also, you mentioned that Le Mans is considered a British race that's in France. I'd never heard that before, and if you could expound on that a little bit.
Well, the first question is, I don't think any racing driver worth the title would ever let somebody else pass him unless he had to. And Timo Glock didn't have to. I've spoken with Timo in the past at some Toyota functions. Now, I don't believe he let Lewis pass. What good would it do him? The second question, the British race on French soil. Brits, they consider themselves the cradle of motorsports. First motor race arguably was in France, but the Brits have such a history and such an economy in motorsports. British Motorsport Valley, which is made up of 7 of the current 10 teams in motorsports, and next year when Cadillac arrives, they'll have 8 of the 11 teams in Formula One based in Britain. plus more sports car teams and university programs and, you name it, manufacturers of extremely high-tech products. All of that is in Britain's Motorsport Valley. So they just, think that one of the big three races, Indy 500, Grand Prix of Le Mans, of Monaco, and the Le Mans 24 Hours, that is their, home. It's their birthright. They have done so well in it over the years. So many great champions. Who was the guy who raced a Bentley, entered Le Mans 3 times, and won it all 3 times? I don't know. But David Hobbs, who raced it 22 times and never won it. He hates those guys. Andy Wallace, it was part of that Jaguar team that won it in 1988. David hates Andy, who's one of the nicest guys in the world, because Andy, first time, what's so hard about that? So that's kind of where it comes from. Yes, sir.
Yeah, the Google's a nice thing. It's Johnny Dumfries you were trying to remember.
Dumfries, yes. Yes,
So-
the Earl of Earl of Butte. It was Johnny Dumfries, who sadly passed away the last couple of years.
Yeah. So my question is, how did Steve Matchett get hooked into you and Hobbs? Because you as a trio, you guys were great.
Thank you very much.
With his experience as a mechanic, it was
Yep.
just wonderful. And I wondered how you got it hooked up with him.
Well, as I said earlier, Chris Economaki kind of invented the pit reporter role. Steve Matchett, to his credit, kind of invented the mechanic in the booth role. For many, many years, Formula One would schedule its Canadian Grand Prix in Montreal in the second week of June, which is when Le Mans 24 Hours takes place. At Speed, we were doing both races. So we needed to split our meager announcer corps. So they broke up David and me, because David knew so much about Le Mans. They sent him over there, and I was going to do Canada. Sam Posey wasn't traveling, so we needed another name. And my producer, Frank Wilson, had read Steve Matchett's books, his trilogy about life in the Formula One pit lane. Steve had been a mechanic and jackman for the Benetton team in Formula One for many years, won a couple of world championships with Michael Schumacher. So Frank just called Steve out of the blue and said, "Would you like to do this with Bob?" And Steve said, "Sure, I'll do that." And over he came, and it's like that cute little puppy. He never left. But he did add so much to the broadcast.
It was his insights were so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, from really cool stuff like prepping tires and the most minute changes that could be made to the car, and some of the incredible personalities in the pit lane. One of whom is the guy who is now taking over as team principal at Racing Bulls, the B team. Alan Permain is his name. They always used to call him Bat because he loved to work through the night. That was just his thing, I'll be there for lunch and then I'll work until the sun comes up. So Bat has really made a name for himself. But Steve came and stayed, and after that you saw guys in the booth, leading all the way up to guys like Steve on the NASCAR shows. Letarte.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have to do another one of these next week. Will you come with me, please?
We've got another question over here.
Bob, thank you again for coming this evening.
Pleasure.
Kind of an open-ended question. Bernie Ecclestone, comments or reflections or what have you, please?
Comments on Bernie? Bernie is generally regarded as the biggest villain in motorsports. Bernie's now 94, fabulously wealthy, but there are good things to say about him. He grew up selling used cars in what Londoners call the West End, which is kind of the scruffy part of town. And he learned very early on the value of a handshake and a contract. And there's some wild stories along that, with that. He was a very loyal guy. If you were loyal to him, he'd be very loyal to you, and he spent a lot of money on friends and employees of his who came into financial difficulty. He also was renowned for using muscle to get his way in a deal. Peter Windsor, who was our Formula One pit reporter for a while, recalls being in a bidding war for one of the Formula One teams, and Bernie Ecclestone didn't want Peter and his colleagues to get it, and Peter wound up being beaten senseless and left lying by the side of the road next to his car, which was untouched. His briefcase was on the front seat, car keys were in the car, and the next time Peter saw Bernie said, well, we won't have any more disagreement about this, will we? There's also an apocryphal story. I don't know if this is true, but supposedly Bernie was in another headbutting with somebody about a deal, and Bernie suggested that they fly from England in Bernie's plane to France and have lunch and talk it over. And so they flew over, had lunch, talked it over, plane came back, and this guy wasn't on it. So make of that what you will. In fact, I think maybe it took off from Britain, and he wasn't on it when it landed in France. But Bernie could be a really interesting, funny guy. I did have a couple of meals with him and tried to fool him into telling me where the U.S. Grand Prix was going to be. This was pre-Indy. You know, where are we going to go now that Watkins Glen is in the distant rearview mirror? And he said, oh, we have a place in mind. And I said, well, then I will buy you dinner. Where should I book? And he looked at me and said, no, you're not going to do that to me. And he also had a child at the age of 91, a son named Ace, who is the newest poster boy for the Lucky Sperm Club. Because Bernie, you know, is billionaire, multi-billionaire, despite having to give a lot of it back in penalties and fines and stuff. Ken Tyrrell, who is one of the great personalities in my experience in Formula One, had curiosity about all kinds of American motorsports. He particularly loved drag racing. He said, would you explain to me how they get 15 gallons of nitromethane through a 500 cubic inch V8 engine in 5 seconds? I said, yeah, giant fuel pump. But he also told me how Bernie got control of Formula One, because before Bernie, who was a car owner with the Brabham team, and a driver manager, you know, looked around. The cars would practice whenever they felt like it. There was no rigid schedule, no TV interest. So Bernie said, got the owners together, and he said, sign over your rights to me, and I will handle everything. I'll work with the promoters, I'll get the appearance money, I'll work with TV, we'll get contracts, you'll all make a lot of money. I will organize the convoys of gear around the world, blah, 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 blah. And he did all of that. And Ken said, you know, when Bernie said, this is what I want to do, Ken said, well, sure, I'll sign that. You got to be out of your mind that you're going to try to organize this bunch of piranhas into some kind of organized force. But he did it, and he made a fortune, and, you know, like most fairly ugly men, had beautiful daughters who are...
Got one in the top row, middle.
Another question up here in the top.
Sure.
Hey, Bob. As an old school guy, which I am, and used to watching races for many years, I'm just wondering what your opinion is. It seems to me, well, let's look at it this way. NASCAR, Indy, and Formula One. What do you see the future in terms of those series against each other, and who wins and who loses? But the other thing is, I'm always kind of puzzled by the gimmicks that they put into racing. And what I'm talking about, the drag reduction system and push to pass and phase 1, 2, and 3 in NASCAR. What is your opinion about that? And is it going to stay in these series, or is there a better way?
Well, there will be other ways. There'll be other devices, whether you call them gimmicks or whatever. The problem is your entertainment, and you need to be relevant. You need to put on a good show. So the series that you mentioned are all constantly striving to improve the show. Formula One messed with its qualifying format for so many years, how it distributes points, the makeup of the race cars, the DRS, like you said, the energy recovery systems. NASCAR is looking at hybrids. IndyCar already has them. I hate to see them all compared to each other as though they were competitors. I mean, they're apples and oranges. They're all different. There's no point in doing what somebody else has done because you want to be successful. Maybe you want better TV ratings than the other guys, but I don't think Formula One will ever outrate NASCAR in the United States. I'd be surprised. Maybe it'll happen, but so the idea is to put on that same sort of entertainment in a slightly different way, because of the tracks, because of the makeup of the cars, and what have you. And history gets involved in all that. I mean, Indianapolis 500 is one of the world's great races for a reason. The Corn Grand Prix in Des Moines, not so much. It takes history, which is why my favorite tracks are all the historic ones. Spa, Monza, Silverstone, Monaco, and so on. Who's going to win out? I don't think you actually win. As long as you're successful, then you're doing fine. As to what they're going to have next to try to attract you, I will say this. I once sat with Ken Squire at dinner, and there had just been some safety innovation introduced. Can't remember what it was along the way. And Ken was kind of in a bad mood about it. He said, look, make racing as safe as you possibly can. Absolutely. But don't brag about it. We don't want people thinking these guys are all out there and there's no way they're going to get hurt or killed. This is a thrill show. You're supposed to scare people to death. And that's why people bring it up when we talk about screaming V10 engines in Formula One. You need a race car that the average person looks at and doesn't say, well, give me some time. I could, kind of get up to a reasonable speed. You want a person to say, oh my God, how did they do this? And, so I think there was a lot of truth in what Ken had to say about that.
We got
Sir.
time for a couple more questions. I think we got a microphone over here.
Okay. Yeah. Well, first of all, last week I ran the Peachtree Road Race for I think the 17th consecutive year, so thank you for putting that on the map. But also, you talked a lot about your time being the voice of Formula One on ESPN and Speed Channel. But I also know that for a few years there, in between stints of Formula One, you were also the voice of what, when I was growing up, was my favorite all-time racing series, which was Kart for ABC in the late 90s, then Speed Channel in, I think, 2002. And I was just curious to know if you had any interesting stories that you wanted to share with that, especially in particular with Alex Zanardi, who was my favorite driver of that time and who's had, very
tough time.
Yeah, very triumphant and very tragic life.
Yeah,
So.
when people ask me, who is your favorite or most interesting driver over the years, number one is Alex Zanardi, two-time kart champion, Indy 500 winner. Had trouble driving lousy cars in Formula One, but just a wonderful guy and would just charm the pants off of anybody he ran into. Then he had that horrible accident in Europe where he spun up onto the racetrack, was hit by Alex Tagliani, and it basically took his legs off, one above the knee, one below. Died twice on the helicopter going to Berlin. His entire life seemed like it was going to be a total wreck. But they kept him alive. They bound up his wounds. They set the bones and fitted him with prosthetic legs. And when I saw him a year or two later, he totally cracked me up. He said, there's a lot of good things about having prosthetic legs. I can be as tall as I want to be. Or his favorite trick would be to sit down in a party environment and take one leg and turn it all the way up and put his glass of wine on the sole of his foot. Just the most optimistic guy you could ever possibly meet in life. Of course, he went on to transform his body, became a wheelchair athlete, won 4 or 5 Olympic gold medals, Paralympic gold medals, I should say. And then sadly, a few years ago, was in a charity wheelchair relay in Italy and collided head-on with a truck, which messed him up very badly. And to be honest, he hasn't been seen in public, to my knowledge, since. He had to have his face reconstructed and on and on and on. But I'd like to think that that old sunny nature is still there.
Got another question over here.
Hi, I wanted to ask about Monaco. I think from a historical significance point of view, it's really important on the F1 calendar. It's part of the Triple Crown. But I think over the years it's gotten a lot of flack because it's less of a race and more of the world's fastest parade. I'm curious what your thoughts are on long-term or short-term and long-term solutions on how you fix that and make the race on Sunday more of a race.
Well, yeah, people talk all the time in Formula One about, will Monaco go away? That's like saying, will Ferrari ever go away from Formula One? No, it just won't happen. It's too important to the series. Are the cars now too big and heavy and fast for Monaco? Sure. They have been for a long time, although now they're at their biggest and heaviest. Next year, the new rule set calls for a car that is smaller and lighter and more powerful, and hopefully they'll be able to alleviate that problem. Personally, I have a little trouble connecting with that issue because to me, racing isn't all about how many passes there are. I mean, look at that race we just had at Silverstone. Wet, dry race, constant strategy changes. What tire are we going to be on when? Ferrari got it wrong and suffered for it. Nico Hülkenberg got it right, calling those pit stops and tire compounds from the car and won his first podium, third place, his first podium in 239 starts. That kind of story, the fact that that can still happen brings me back race after race. Monaco's not going anywhere. The cars will hopefully get better for the racetracks. That's a problem we face everywhere, in every form of motorsport, really. The cars getting too fast for the racetracks. That was the problem at Imola after Senna was killed and Ratzenberger was killed. Senna hit the wall at the Tamburello corner, and of course the first thing you think is, well, let's move the wall back and create more space to slow the cars. But you can't, because there's a river that runs right behind it. The same river that overflowed a couple of years ago and canceled the race. There has to be other solutions. I would hate to see Imola go away. It's one of my favorite tracks. So if they need to change the configuration of the track in some way, I hope they will consider doing it. Part of the problem now with the schedule is that there are so many countries that want races that they're having trouble figuring out how they can do that. So they're thinking about starting to rotate races. The Spa Belgium Grand Prix has already agreed to run every other year for the next 6 or 8 years, and they'll rotate with another race. Germany tried that for a while between Hockenheim and the Nürburgring, but now there's no German tracks on the series. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that they would like to do from the perspective of the season calendar. But as you learn in my business, there's only so many weekends in the year, and too many great things to do on every one of them.
So we've got time for one.
My question is, how do you think that Formula One, I heard this from the radio, you may know more about that than me, but they said one car could cost anywhere from $10 to $20 million. Where does all that money come from? TV advertisement and
Sponsorships?
manufacturers? Because most of them have to have 2 cars at least.
Oh,
I
yeah.
would think.
They have 2 cars. They have a third chassis ready to build up into a race car. They don't allow them to have a third complete car anymore. The money comes from a lot of sources. The prize money is huge in Formula One. When you see the Indy 500 headlines the day after the race, say, and the winner gets the lion's share of a $14 million purse for this year's race, another record purse. If you work out the numbers in Formula One, and divided by the number of races, I've done this calculation, and every race is worth about $45 million. It's a tremendous amount of money involved. Of course, the teams never have enough money. They'll spend all they have and then more, which is common among every form of motorsport. Sponsors, TV is a big chunk, and the series itself, the FOM, that handles all the money. And I don't think you can build a Formula One car, certainly not a competitive one. Jack Roush used to do engines for everybody, and if you wanted an engine, Jack would say, well, you just want to enter? Do you want to be competitive, or do you want to win? Because there's 3 different price points for the same engines. I would guess, Formula One cars run a lot closer to $100 million each. When the steering wheel is $30,000, the noses are $20,000, $30,000. All the carbon fiber work, a factory with over 1,000 employees in it. There's a tremendous amount of research and development. Operating the wind tunnel. Can't use somebody else's wind tunnel. You got to have your own. There's so much expenditure. It doesn't need to cost that much, but it does.
Well, we have come upon that time where this just goes so quick, and we could stay up here for hours just talking and telling stories. We'll stick around for a little bit. If you've got any other questions, you're welcome to come down. But I want to appreciate you all for being here, and please join me in thanking living broadcasting legend Bob Varsha for joining us here at Savoy. Thank you, Bob, for being here, and appreciate you being a part of it.
Anytime. Thank you all.